Hello and welcome to the latest Customs Clinic videocast brought to you by Customs Manager. I'm Paul Mullins of Sandusky PR and I'm going to be talking to Arne Mielken. I hope I've got your name correct there, Arne. Founder of Customs Manager. Yep. And we're going to be talking about trading with the EU now that the UK has left the European market. So hello, Arne.
Hello, nice to see you. Nice to be with you again.
Fantastic. So I guess the aim of the Customs Clinics to offer practical advice and guidance on some of the common problems that exporters and importers face when trading with the EU, well, and indeed the world, I guess. So one of the biggest issues causing businesses a lot of confusion and anxiety at the moment are these notoriously complex rules of origin. And many firms, I think I'm right in saying, Arne, are surprised to find that they can't benefit from tariff-free trade unless they satisfy these new rules. But they often struggle with the paperwork. So in a nutshell, Arne, what are the rules of origin and who do they apply to?
Rules of origin help determine the economic nationality of your product. So you could have products that come from China and they've been produced and manufactured in China, and then they have a Chinese origin. However, there are also products that are just transported from country A to country B and then exported out of country B to country C, and then it becomes more complicated, right? Because what is the right country of origin? Is it where the goods come from, or is it where the product was produced? So there's a bit of confusion here, and it becomes even more puzzling when the rules of origin apply to goods that have multiple manufacturing processes in different countries. So create a car, you produce it in this country, then you produce it in that country, and then you get confused because where was this car made? So it's the economic nationality of a product, and it applies to everybody who wants to import the product, then needs to decide what the origin is. There are two types of origin, but the one most are interested in is the so-called preferential origin. And that, I think we might want to talk about today, applies to anybody who imports and who wants to save some money, potentially.
Okay. So how do you establish the origin of your goods? I mean, using the example you gave, or if you make a product that has multiple ingredients or components, how do you establish, how do you go about doing that to qualify for duty-free trade?
There is a general rule that applies almost all the time, if not all the time, in fact. And it is where the last substantial, economically viable processing took place. Or where the product, I call it, was born. What do I mean? So there are different types of products. The first set is the agricultural products. They are born, well, where the animal is born, or where the plant starts to grow, or where the minerals are taken out of the earth. So that's called wholly obtained. And if something is wholly obtained, well, that's then their origin, because literally this is where it's from. The other way, though, is, as I said, when you produce a product of multiple raw materials or components, you then need to look into where this last substantial, economically significant processing took place. And every word matters here. Last, substantial, and we can argue for a long time what substantial means, but there are clear definition, and then economically significant processing took place. So where the components, when put together, become an actual car, for example. So these are the two generic rules that you have to think about. Either it is agricultural, then where is it created? Like where does it come out of the ground or is it born? And economically last transformation, where is the product put together and transformed from raw material into the new value-added product. These are the generic rules, but then there are product-specific rules and granular details in trade agreements we need to maybe discuss.
Yeah, no wonder business owners are pulling out their hair trying to get their head round establishing the the origin of the goods, particularly if they're made from multiple ingredients and components. So I guess some of the larger companies will be equipped, they'll have the in-house expertise, but maybe some smaller businesses may not necessarily have that specialist knowledge. So what are the major stumbling blocks? What common mistakes do businesses make when addressing rules of origin?
So I would point to, well, let's start with two. The first one is to misunderstand this concept of where does a product originate from with where is it shipped from.
Right, okay.
So understanding that where something is shipped from doesn't necessarily mean that this is where it was produced or transformed, and that could trip you up. The second is to understand that there is a difference between the types of origin, meaning there is a non-preferential origin which applies in every case, and there is a preferential origin, and that's treated differently. I won't go into details now, but they have different requirements and they have different way of putting that onto the customs declaration. So you could have a non-preferential origin that doesn't meet the preferential origin, and that we need to go into the details of what the preference and the non-preferential difference is. But that is something that companies struggle to understand because it's not very easy to understand, quite frankly. And I guess the third thing I would say is that people or companies go with the general rules that I've explained now, with the transformation and this is where it's transformed, without understanding that despite these general rules that I've explained, it's unfortunately not the end of it. For preferential trade, you need to meet the rules of the actual trade agreement. So you need to open that 1,000 page plus complicated lawyer talk document, find two sets of rules. First, the generic rules of origin in the kind of front of the text, and then the product specific rules of origin at the kind of annex back of the text. So take the EU-UK trade agreement. You would first need to make sure that you meet the overall rules of origin, like insufficient processing. Some processes just don't qualify ever as originating, or you start to make stops in between. You go from Japan to Dubai to Turkey and then to the EU, and then you wonder why you don't qualify anymore. Well, you made all these stops in between, so that's not cool. But once you met these general rules, you then need to go to the back of the book, so to speak, and look at how you meet these product-specific rules, and that's complicated. So there are lots of ways that businesses might find themselves in a bit of trouble, and it's really working through these aspects bit by bit, step by step, and finding out what a business needs to do and how you can best meet these rules of origin. That brings the most reward, and make sure you get it right.
Okay, so in terms of making a correct statement of origin and other terms, supplier declarations, any advice on that and where they should go?
Yeah, you reminded me of a good area that I didn't mention actually, and that is the proof of origin. You are right. You need to prove that a product originates, right? It's no good me telling you it originates or a business saying, well, it originates. You need to prove it. And the way you do that is with the proof of origin seen in the trade agreement. And that could be a certificate of origin. It could be a statement on origin. It could be importer's knowledge. Lots of ways you can work with this. In the EU-UK trade agreement, the two ways are the statement on origin and importer's knowledge. And the key message here is that you can't just arbitrarily put the statement on an invoice, a commercial invoice. You need to know that you actually meet the rules of origin step one. Step two, when you do put it on an invoice, do make sure it has the correct text, right? As foreseen by the trade agreement. Don't start to add anything, remove, and if in doubt, get advice first on how to complete it before you put it on an invoice. Because if you do put it on the invoice without due consideration, well, the customs may not like it, the customer may not like it, and if they all don't like it, then the two people that can hold up your goods at the border and make this import-export situation difficult are not happy. You want to make them happy. So make sure you copy and paste directly from the legislation, you complete it correctly, and only when you have the right to do so because your products originate.
Okay, now that sounds like sound advice, and I think already we're learning that rules of origin is a potential minefield if you don't do your homework and work through the process methodically. Okay, so can you give some examples without giving away any client confidentialities, but could you give some examples of how you have helped businesses navigate the rules of origin?
Yes, of course. It's something that I work on a lot, much more in the last couple of months now. It really ranges from client to client, also because the products are so different. And with that, the rules of origin are so different. So textiles industry, for example, has a very complicated rules of origin that require a very close look and good analysis. In the agricultural sector, sometimes you find very strange rules of origin that don't seem to make a lot of sense. So we got to find a way to navigate those. I guess the practical examples I can give would be, first of all, understanding the rule of origin, interpreting it, explaining to businesses what it means practically for their business, looking and making the regulation meet the business requirements or the business production. So looking at the business production, saying, how does that meet the rules of origin, right? So really deep diving into what we call a BOM. Don't be afraid, right? It's not
right.
BOM, but it's a BOM, B-O-M, a bill of material, right? To understand what a bill of material has to look like, what are the components, how much value do they have, etc., etc. So analyzing all of this from a company perspective, applying it to the rules of origin, and then saying, based on this, you meet or meet not the rule of origin. This is a key work I'm undertaking. Okay. There are two more things I find quite fascinating right now, and clients I work with. One is helping them with so-called AORs, advanced origin ruling, and I think you might have a question on the BOIs a little bit later, I think. Yes. So this is in the UK is now called advanced origin ruling. So helping clients of quite complex compositions to apply for those and make sure they obtain it so they can get legal certainty on their origin. And the final one, the most exciting one, I must admit, is to take this global and to say, I'm a multinational company. I am exporting around the world. Don't help me just with the EU-UK trade agreement. Help me to design a slick customs process for meeting the rules of origin for all of my products in over 50 trade agreements, over 50 countries around the world.
Wow.
And that is a customs planning and customs strategy extraordinary piece of work, which is super fascinating because now we're not longer talking about EU-UK TCA, we are talking about leveraging the USMCA, so the US-Canada-Mexico agreement. We talk about the Asia-Pacific region and meeting those agreements and various EU agreements. And there are ways we can do this. And every time the result is the same. The savings are enormous. We're talking millions and millions and millions of pounds, dollars, and euros that people can save through duty optimization strategies such as leveraging free trade agreements.
Okay, no, some more fantastic advice. So, I mean, you've touched on this, but what if you can't establish the origin of your goods? I mean, how else can you save duty and costs?
It's a very good point. So the bad news is, well, there are a few things we can do, but you might want to just pay. I know it sounds really horrible, but the first thing to say is, what is the benefit you're getting from it? First of all, look at what's the duty rate on your product that you would be saving us. We're not doing this exercise per se just so that we can originate. First of all, what's the duty rate? If the duty rate is 0, well, why are you doing this in the first place, right? You can import it for free, so don't even bother with the rules of origin. If it's 1%, 2%, is this something that your business can absorb? The reason why I say this is because there is some admin, right? There is some red tape that is being introduced. So first of all, make it worth your while. If you do have a positive rate of duty that is 5, 6, 7, let alone I work with clients of 25% duty savings, then we must find a solution, because a 25 or 6 or 7% increase in your price just for duty, that can really hamper your business and cost you market share.
And it makes some products potentially, unviable.
Exactly. Yes. So what can you do? Well, the first thing to do is think about, is there, apart from importing, is there a way you can use the duty suspension regimes offered by legislation? Whether that is warehousing, whether that is processing, whether that is what we know as end use or temporary admission. These are ways to get into the country without, without having to pay duties and tax. Now, that works in some instances. In some instances, it doesn't work. So, it's one thing to consider. Then, if that doesn't work, well, then you are left with some more exotic options. One thing is to consider whether a tariff suspension regime might be useful. Now, that is a quite drastic thing, whereby you go to the government and you say, this is not working for me. But we really have a need for this. Can you suspend the duty altogether? And the last one, if you are...
to pick you up on that,
yeah.
Isn't that going to be quite a long shot and beyond the gift of a smaller business?
No, because you've got people like me who help you, right? We know how to make an application for a tariff suspension. We know how the process works. We know what the law says and what the conditions are for being successful. So we are trained to help businesses get a tariff suspension. Now, the outcome is never sure. It's the total decision of the government, but we have an established process. We know how to do this to get it done. So tariff suspensions, and if tariff suspension is not an option, we can think about quotas. Can think about whether there is maybe the first 500,000 tons of this product could be imported at 0 rate, and then it goes up. So there are a few, again, customs planning and customs strategy plays a role here.
So it's not the end of the world if you can't prove the origin. There are potential options open to you.
Yeah.
You mentioned the binding origin information. Have I got that term correct? So just recap, what is that, and how would a business qualify for that?
So in the EU, we call it binding origin information, BOI. In the UK, we now have a fancy new name. It's called AOR, Advanced Origin Ruling.
Right.
All the same. So I explained to you, Paul, what originating means, right? Now, if we had a discussion on a product, you would come potentially to a different conclusion than I as regard the origination of this product. Because, the rules are set to a certain extent, but there is always some room for interpretation. But that's not good enough for businesses, right? Because you may do your best to determine origin, but what if the customs authorities in Finland, Sweden, or whichever other country don't agree? That could mean that if you could get into the spiral of audits, of investigations, and of invalidation of claims of origin and reduced duty, and therefore have to pay back. That can be millions.
Wow.
Because they can assess it 3 to 5 years back. So imagine you've saved duty of hundreds of thousands every year. Now it's being clawed back, it's being claimed back. So to avoid that, you get a BOI or an AOR, and that is a legal ruling by the authorities to confirm what the origin is. So you can rely on that. In fact, you have to rely on that. And then that gives you legal certainty that you can legitimately bring this in for a 0% rate, and nobody can say that this is not in line with the law because you have this BOI or AOR. So it's a really good tool. It's free. The government gives this out for free, but it requires an application process. It requires the government to certify that you meet these rules of origin, and that is a bit of red tape and administrative costs, I would say. And of course, if they do not rule in the way you think they should rule, then you have achieved the opposite, right? Then you have a confirmation that you do not meet the rules, and then you're out of a duty benefit here.
Okay.
So it's a good thing, but again, it needs to be thought through and not just wildly applied for.
Okay. No, thanks for that, Arne. And in terms of sources of help or guides or tools to help businesses with rules of origin, I mean, obviously they can come to your good self for expert advice and guidance, but are there any guides or tools out there that you could recommend?
So obviously the government is quite keen on establishing guidance. So if you take the UK, there is, go to Gov UK. I mean, the amount of information on origin is staggering. If you go to the EU site and you go EU Commission Origin, you Google that, you will find quite a lot of guidance and information. And then if you're in the EU and you want to read this in German or in French or in Spanish, then there's also guidance on the national customs websites. The challenge with that is, of course, that it's too much. There's so much information everywhere. The question is, how do you make sense of it, and how do you make sense of it for your business? Right? You can't spend the day reading news pages and updates. You need to speak to someone. And what my clients have appreciated is the opportunity to do what we do right now. So an informal session where we sit together, have a bit of a coffee or a tea, and just talk about it, right? Talk about whatever is your project, whatever is your interest. And so this is, this customs clinic idea we're doing here. We offer our clients in a, relaxed atmosphere to talk about anything in global trade and customs, and give some ideas and thoughts on what all this knowledge means for them.
Yeah, and hopefully by watching the customs clinics, areas such as rules of origin, which are fiendishly complicated, as we've discussed, we're trying to demystify that for businesses. Just because we're coming to the end now of our videocast currently. So is there any other advice, anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention?
I think once we got over, I understand right now everybody's focused on compliance and meeting these new rules. But once this kind of settles and we kind of got to the grips with it, let's have a look at, as we diversify and export more, where are trade agreements outside the EU and the UK that we could leverage? Are we dealing with Canada? Are we dealing with Turkey? Are we doing the Mediterranean? Are we doing Japan? Are we doing South Korea? All of these areas have trade agreements, probably with the UK and or the EU. And we need to make sure that once we got the 0 rate with our neighbors, we get the 0 rate with further afield. We have a real opportunity here because we're learning rules of origin in and out. We are getting better at it. We are understanding it. We are getting the documents ready. We do all of that. But now let's go and take this global if we can. Let's go and see if there are trade agreements we can leverage abroad further afield and really optimize our supply chain from a duty perspective and really only pay when it's due, because after all, that will make it easier, that will make it less paperwork, that will make it more cost effective, and that ensures that our going global idea is as optimal and as successful as possible.
So once you've done rules of origin for trading with our nearest neighbours, then how different are the processes for other countries and other non-EU countries and countries where we've got trade agreements? I mean, once you've done one, is it easy then to fill out the or comply with the rules of origin for other countries, or do they all have completely different processes for doing that?
They don't and they do.
Right.
So devil in the detail. The fundamental aspects of it are similar because there is a base rule called the World Trade Organization, and based on the agreements of the World Trade Organizations, we have a standard by which we create rules of origin and trade agreements. So there are similarities, and it is worthwhile verifying if we can meet the rules of origin under separate agreements. Now, again, you need to be smart and look at this and analyze it and try to find the common elements. But there are ways where you can quite quickly establish whether you can meet rules of origin in other trade agreements as well. They're not fundamentally different. They're just written in a different way, and they might have nuances that are different. Some parts may apply, some other parts may not apply.
Right.
So you do have to analyze them on a regulation or agreement by agreement basis. But the fundamental concepts of what is originating are the same. So I guess the message is, don't be scared, don't be afraid, let's have a go. What's the worst that can happen? You can save some money.
Sounds good to me. And saving money is what it's all about, I guess. And probably a good note to end on there, Arne, for this Customs Clinic videocast. So thanks once again for all your expertise. Hopefully we've taken some of the mystery and confusion out of rules of origin. And yeah, so to everyone watching, be sure to tune in for to the next Customs Clinic. And thanks, Arne, once again.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.